I'm really not a fan of what he's doing with the tariffs.
I don't like how he does things, but it does make sense.
He doesn't do a good job of selling it.
I'm not sure who he's trying to help. It's worrisome.
I've been following up with voters who I met last year, and what I found is that it's often tariffs that come up as their sticking point with this administration, and their concern that it could make inflation worse.
Don't understand it economically.
The tariffs, I'd hate to see common people have to pay more.
Just saying I'm going to increase the tariffs by 50%. I don't know what that means.
So what do Americans really think about tariffs? And is the White House making a political mistake? I started with this article from my colleagues Ruth Igielnik and Zhang. These bars represent 25 ways Americans were asked about Trump's tariffs across 13 different polls. Support for tariffs can be as high as 56% or as low as 29%, depending on how you ask the question. The questions that get the most support for tariffs are the questions that mention China specifically, and there's much lower levels of support for questions that mention Canada, Mexico, or Europe. And that data lines up with my own reporting.
If we want to get in a trade war with China, I'm all for it if it hurts them a little bit. But like with Canada and Mexico, I'm willing to see what happens, but I feel like hurting our two closest neighbors, that probably ain't the right move.
Americans seem fairly aware of the potential risk of tariffs. Data shows that they're more likely to say that they think that tariffs will hurt the economy. And that's even true among the Americans who support it. When you ask Republicans about this, some argue that Americans are fine paying higher prices in the short term for the long-term benefit of bringing back American jobs. It all goes back to how you ask the question. Because when Americans are asked if they support tariffs for the purposes of bringing back American jobs, support is much higher. But when you ask Americans if they're willing to support tariffs even if prices increase, support is much lower. American support for tariffs may depend on the story the White House is telling.
I think he doesn't do a good job of selling it. He talks about increasing tariffs. We don't know why. Why? Trump will say things like they've treated us really badly. What the hell does that mean?
It's clear that Americans are still deciding how they feel about tariffs. And a lot of the public reaction could come down to the specifics. Who the White House policy targets, and what's the tangible effect that tariffs have on the pocketbooks of everyday Americans. But the other thing that's clear is that there is a real risk of political backlash. Because if they don't successfully make that case, a lot of Americans could be asking why the president who promised to end inflation on day one is making it worse.